Good evening. I'm Cory Morgan, and this is The Pipeline. This is the Western Standard's weekly panel show where we'll take a few issues with a number of our staff members and dissect and discuss them and tell you what we think about them and maybe try to imply what we think you should think about them. But it's up to you. You come to your conclusions. We've got lots to talk about today. I'm going to start, though, actually with something else, a little bit of housekeeping. Some of our regular members with the Western Standard might have noticed there's some problems getting into the website. We've migrated to a whole new platform, and it will be an improvement. It's going to be really good when it's all done. Unfortunately, we ran into some hiccups, and there's been some difficulties for folks logging in. So what's happened is we're giving actually free access until we fix it. So if you're already subscribers, get on in there, guys. Have a look. Sorry for the delays, and I appreciate the patience. If you haven't subscribed yet, hey, here's a good chance to get a sneak peek and realize why it's so important and so worth it for you to spend $9.99 a month or $100 a year to subscribe and get back there and see all those columns and stories without that nasty paywall in the way. So kind of, we're going to turn this into a treat for you. And again, thank you guys for the patience. We'll get it all ironed out. Always those tech things, they can be maddening. The other way we pay our bills, I guess, I should get to that and I'll get that out of the way, is our sponsors, of course. It's important. I shouldn't say it's getting it out of the way. I like talking about these guys. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They've been a fantastic sponsor for us, and they've been a fantastic advocate for anybody who owns firearms. If you own them, collect them. Whether you want to target shooting, hunting, whatever you want, it's your business. But we got a government that doesn't want you to have the ability to do those things. They think it's their business, and you need to push back. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association stands up for you. They advocate for you, but you got to be a member. They can't help you unless you help them. So check them out, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Their website, CSSA-CILA.org, or just Google them. Take out a membership. It's a worthwhile investment in your own rights. Okay, we got a bit of a different panel shakeup today, but with some standard names you would have seen in your stories and articles through the months, and even now getting past a year in some with Jonathan here. So I'll start on the end there. We got our reporter, Jonathan Bradley. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Cory. It's been a while since I've been on here.
Yeah, it's been a bit. So you're overdue. And we got it totally, messed up. Eventually, I'm going to get back in my chair over in the end. It's been a while now. And we've got Shaun Polczer here in the middle.
Thank you very much.
Filling in for, we got Dave, Nigel, Derek, all in different forms of inability to come in right now. So they're all getting better. We'll have a normal lineup coming again. But it's fine, people want to see the same faces all the time. I know they get tired of mine. I've been the consistent one all the way through here, but glad you guys could pretty it up a little on the end there. All right, enough of that. Well, let's start. Again, the top story of the week, and it's probably going to be the top story of the year, is the Israel-Gaza conflict. And it's horrific. It's just in its early stages, unfortunately. I hate to say it. We're seeing a lot of awful imagery. And what I want to talk about, though, is also the miscommunication, the accuracy in reporting. Jonathan, as a reporter watching this, maybe I'll get your views on what you're seeing on the reporting and coverage of this event as it's coming out.
Well, one thing that I've noticed in particular is how many people are justifying Hamas's actions as acceptable. Like, I did a story, I think it was last Thursday, about the York University student unions coming together and putting out a statement saying that Hamas's terrorism is justified, and that they said that Hamas's terrorist attack is all about colonialism. And what I found particularly funny about these comments was the president of the Graduate Students Union who signed on to the statement is non-binary. I'm not too sure if they know what happens to non-binary people in Palestine, but it was, I had a chuckle about that. But even some public figures like the QP Ontario president has spoken out in support of Palestine and justified Hamas's actions. So it has been a bit troubling, to say the least.
Yeah, well, getting on to the media, and Shaun, we see some of the race. We could be guilty of it too. It's a bit of the digital world too. Everybody wants to be on the story first. They want to be the ones who hit that story out there. They might not have a reporter on the ground over there, so they're relying on Twitter and X as much as anybody, or following accounts or press releases. But we've seen some recent, really, I think, jumping the gun on some big incidents that have happened, and it causes damage when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. They say that truth is the first casualty of war. And we had an example of that yesterday with the so-called hospital bombing, which in itself is an awful, horrible thing. 500 people getting killed in a hospital where they're supposed to be safe. And exactly like you said, Cory. So it flashed out on Twitter, and there's a lot of pressure to get out there with the story and be first with it, maybe before all the facts are even known, and then it come out maybe half an hour later that, chances are this could have been a friendly fire incident. And, and then there again, those videos were put out on Twitter, released by the IDF. I would imagine that they would have had to been vetted on the other end before they would take such a step to actually do that and maybe kind of cross-verify it. But the narrative kind of gets a little hazy in the fog of war, as they say.
Yeah, well, the media world should know better, I would think. Well, who knows? We don't necessarily know better. But I mean, in IDF, for people unfamiliar with the Israel Defense Forces, and I mean, I wouldn't put it beyond the IDF to put out BS. It's a war. They're going to do propaganda on their end as well. I mean, what I found kind of striking when this happened, though, when it was breaking out, was Hamas. I mean, that was, they said, it's the Hamas Health Authority. Well, yeah, or the Palestine or Gaza Health Authority. Yeah, that's Hamas. Hamas governs that area. Put it out, and they had numbers that were just, wow, this has happened half an hour ago, and there's 562 people dead, and it was this and this. I mean, there are already some alarm bells. I mean, these guys could barely count, what's going on a street. How do they have these precise numbers? Meanwhile, Israel and IDF was saying, well, we aren't going to respond to this. We got to research and check into some things first because we're not quite sure what happened. It just gives me more of a sense of trust with the one who's willing to admit we don't know what happened yet than the ones who came up with such a...
Yeah, that's true. But, our news editor, Dave Naylor, called us over, to around his desk and asked, should we be posting, reposting these videos that have been coming up on Twitter. And, I'm not a war correspondent. I've never covered a war, but I've been to a couple riots, Stanley Cup riots here in this country. And when you saw the pictures of all the bodies laying around, like my first thought was like, oh my God, like, because I was thinking that too, how can you come up with 500? But I mean, there was definitely, dozens, hundreds of, whatever you want to call them, casualties. I don't even know.
There's no doubt it was tragic, no matter who did it.
I don't even know if they were actually laying down there on the ground. Maybe it could have been staged, but it didn't kind of seem like that. You have to think that there definitely was an incident, and it was definitely tragic in any event, whoever was responsible for it.
Yeah.
But, and it's kind of like you make the point too, Hamas is the civic government there. So they would be running the health authority, and they would be running the hospital. And it seems a little disingenuous that, that they would want to fire on their own people, right? So, now they're saying it was some kind of a splinter group.
Well, and the report also is that it sounds like maybe they were launching a missile that was intended to go to Israel and hit innocent people there instead, but it broke up and then crashed on the hospital accidentally.
So you get into this moral equivalent argument, is it better or worse to kill other people or,
Yeah, and but I mean, we're in this age of instant news, and Jonathan, you're kind of younger among us and you're more used to it. Like, it's the age of the iPhone. As you mentioned, we used to see things in the past where perhaps there was staging of incidents and things going on, but I don't think they could get away with that now because thered be 100 other people who would have other pictures they've been taking with their cameras saying quite to the contrary and showing that. So I suspect, unfortunately, those images of bodies were real, and it's awful, no matter who did it.
Yes.
But I mean, how do you respond? I mean, well, what would Dave say, though, if you wrote a story just based on a few Twitter videos and things you shot and you put it up there on the website?
Well, Dave wouldn't be too happy about that, but I mean, we saw yesterday with the story about the Gaza hospital where all the media were jumping on it saying that, this was an Israel Defense Force missile that struck the hospital. But it was a few hours later when it came out that no, it was a Hamas missile that didn't have enough range that ended up striking the hospital. What was interesting to see was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh justified their comments, saying that, like, put out tweets saying, this is like a war crime and all that. But when the information came up, they didn't back it up and say, I was wrong. Sorry about that. this is like Hamas who did it. So it's been the last few weeks have been interesting when it comes to this story.
Yeah, well, and from media, I guess zeal and going out there trying to be first and sometimes misreporting things or not getting all the facts out when they should have hung on. The other worry we have is media bias, which is there. There's opinion guys like me. I mean, my columns would be pretty boring if I don't put my opinion into them. But news copy, a lot of people get mixed up with that online. Fair enough, But
Sure.
you realize there's a big difference between a reporter and a columnist, and you really don't want to see that opinion flowing through from a reporter you don't want to see a columnist trying to write news copy. I mean, if there was a news story written by Cory Morgan, that guy's got a view on everything. His news, you can't believe his stuff. Like there's differences. CBC, I mean, I say ostensibly Canada's biggest news organization, thanks to the billion and some a year they get. But that's one thing that gets me is, so that order has come down and they won't explain themselves on it, but they refuse to call Hamas terrorists. They're not allowed to call it. I mean, CBC reporters and staff are not allowed to use the word terrorist for Hamas. And this isn't an opinion. This is a group that's been registered as a terrorist group within Canada for years. What do we make of that? What rationale would you think the CBC would have in telling them not to refer to it in that case?
I thought it was a little bit confusing because you have the Prime Minister in question period explicitly referring to Hamas as a terrorist organization. As you said, they are legally designated a terrorist organization in this country and in a lot of other countries, in the US and even all through Europe. But yeah, you've definitely got this. It almost seems to be kind of an abundance of caution. I was saying back, because these wars seem to pop up fairly regularly and they seem to run a fairly kind of common script. When we were back at Post Media at the Calgary Herald, we had a company-wide memo came up from Izzy Asper himself that said that we were absolutely not to refer to Palestinians. Mind you, he had a slightly broader brush because they were in the West Bank as well. Palestinians are the Palestinian Authority as freedom fighters because Reuters had been putting that in their copy, right? So, this isn't a new thing, and it comes up, fairly regularly, fairly periodically, and too regularly. In fact, you can. Everybody has sides, but I mean, war is just is a tragedy. It's a breakdown in communication, the ultimate breakdown in communication, and at the end of the day, I think you have to take steps to stop it.
Yeah, well, and it's a confusing, nuanced mess over there too. Like in fairness, you don't want to call every Palestinian a terrorist. Hamas are the terrorists.
Yes.
And Hamas came from Gaza and as with Hezbollah up in Lebanon and the West Bank, but it doesn't mean all of the Palestinians necessarily are members of such and thus are terrorists. So you can over-apply the term terrorist, but in some areas they pretty well earned the title, and we should be able to apply it to them.
I would think so in this case, for sure. That
when you have people, bombing music festivals, killing people, beheading and maiming children, what else can you call them? They're terrorists.
Well, that's it. And again, not picking on you and the youth. It's nice having somebody younger in here because you got a new perspective. We've sat through the past intifada's and seen this. This is just a record that just seems to be on skip. This is the first Middle Eastern blowout that you're seeing, Jonathan.
One in 2021. There was one 2 years ago.
Not quite like this, though. To the scale of it. I mean, we're getting to the Gulf Wars or the 2006 was it when
the
Lebanon and
Gaza,
Israel really went at it heavily with Hezbollah. But it's new eyes on as people keep saying, some of them too. It's just going to go on forever. I mean, people get cynical about it, and it's when you can't see a solution. Maybe younger eyes like your own, you can see a way out because nobody else has been able to manage this since 67.
Well, and I think also what's changed too is what you said about the immediacy of it. You've got all these citizen journalists running around with their iPhones, assuming that they can get them charged without any electricity, and running around and uploading cell cam videos. So, yeah, you'd think that on the one hand, it's very unfiltered. It's happening almost in real time, but then on the other hand, it would be pretty tough to try to stage something or try to, like something that
it would get exposed as being fake.
You get a lot more corroboration, kind of indirect corroboration, maybe not officially, but definitely indirectly for sure.
Well, we're going to see the conspiracy theorists coming out no matter what comes out. And people are going to say that video was a deep fake. That was, that didn't really happen. And you know what? Maybe it could have been. I mean, we had that seminar recently on AI and things. I mean, the stuff that can be created now
Oh, of
again,
course.
I'm leaving it on you, Jonathan. You young guys, you got to be able to cut through the BS. We didn't have this sort of thing to deal with.
I mean, I haven't heard Alex Jones espouse any crazy conspiracy theories
give him
yet,
time.
so we'll see.
Sell some vitamins.
Sure. Oh, he'll be on it, I'm sure. So, I mean, since we've got our energy and business expert in here, Shaun, so with the world energy markets, I mean, we got another Middle East war going on. It's going to go for a while. We're already seeing a little bit of pressure on the markets, but what do you anticipate? What are we looking at here?
Well, OPEC is a lot less unified than, say, it was in 1973 or in 1967 when they had, the big previous oil shocks. Saudi Arabia is extremely conscious of it. From my reading of it, so the geopolitical factors that are at play are probably more of a reason for this kind of outbreak than anything. Israel was supposed to announce a deal with the Saudis, which was going to include an oil component along with an arms pact with the United States. And I'm sure that there's parties in both Hamas and probably within Israel itself that were against that specifically. But you've also seen kind of a split between OPEC members that have condemned, the attacks, and other ones like Qatar. I'm not exactly sure how to say it.
They don't stick the U in it just to mess with
major natural gas suppliers. So instead of an oil embargo this time, they threatened to cut off LNG to Europe because they are staunchly in favor of the Palestinians. The Saudis have kind of tried to stay out of it. Iran, world's fourth largest oil producer, they're calling for an oil embargo. And they're also inextricably wrapped up in this because nobody knows their exact role. And you have to think that Biden's parked 2 aircraft carriers out in the Mediterranean and the third one in the Persian Gulf, basically just to see what they are going to do.
I believe the UK moved one out that way too.
So, you got a lot of firepower sitting in there, and everybody's just kind of got trigger fingers, and we're not really sure what's going to happen. The stuff that's happening on the ground is, it's actually restricted to a fairly smaller area.
Well, I like to think most people, that's what their intent is, to keep it contained. Then they don't want, those ships are out there as a warning, hopefully more than a preparation to start getting active, I would hope.
But that's kind of a new wrinkle that we haven't seen in these past conflicts. You wouldn't see major powers all of a sudden start mobilizing, some pretty serious, firepower and
this fast.
This fast.
Yeah, I mean, if it breaks out there, I mean, people forget how much. And the complexity, how much oil Iran really supplies. And
it all comes through the Straits of Hormuz too. So there's an argument to be made that maybe the reason that they're there is to try to keep those shipping lanes open and maybe try to calm the markets so that you don't have a big price spike. That said, on the hospital bombings, oil was up again, almost $2 before it's pulling back. But we're getting closer and closer to that $100 mark, and I think that's going to be kind of the tipping point. Kind of a
psychological. Now we're a 3-figure per barrel price of
maybe now this is getting serious.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it sounds crass, but there's so much human loss, going on and everything. So look at how it impacts the economic markets, but it's a part of it. It's a determining factor in a lot of the actions of countries, whether we like it or not.
Absolutely.
I mean, the reason Iran still exists, I think, is also the fact that they have so much control of resources over there. If it was another rogue Islamic state performing, they probably would have been invaded like Afghanistan long ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we'll just keep watching. I mean, as of this recording, we're looking at Israel's potentially getting ready, it looks like, to go in on the ground and start trying to root out Hamas members. As I said online, it's talking about sorting out fly poop from the pepper. You got a couple million people there and maybe 10, 20,000 Hamas members, and it's going to be bloody and it's going to be ugly.
Well, and they're underground. I mean, we knew that from the last one. They kept on popping up out of the tunnels and stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, really, they're going to have to clear all of Gaza City first, and then they're going to have to go underground and basically root them out one by one. And it's going to be a messy operation. I'm sure that there's going to be very high casualties on both sides.
Yeah, and it's going to take a while. Well, we'll keep watching and reporting on it and sharing our views how we can. Let's move a little closer to home, I guess. The United Conservative Party, they're going to have their first AGM since Premier Smith got elected. So this will be kind of one that's establishing the flavor of the party under her leadership, though it's supposed to be member-driven, not leader-driven. I understand the difference, but, those overlap a lot. And there's going to be a lot of policy motions. So, Jonathan, you're going to be covering this and
Yes.
watching this, and you've been looking through the list of things that they're looking to examine
Yes.
in a couple of weeks. What do you got?
Well, I'd say with these policy motions, many of them are more so culture warrior type policies, whereas when you saw with the Conservative Convention last month, it was mainly, well, there was a good portion that were like, economic policies related to that type of stuff. This one is really culture warrior type issues. The three big ones that I think people should watch is there's one about the just transition and using the Alberta Sovereignty Act to respond to it. The second one that I think is going to be contentious is the pronoun policy. So it would be similar to New Brunswick and Saskatchewan and what they've been doing, where they require parental consent for students under 16 years old to change pronouns. And the third one is about 15-minute cities and restricting land use developments to try to mitigate them.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I'll start just kind of, been a political weenie for a long time. I was the VP policy for the Wild Rose. I was top in the newsroom. I got to deal with some really colorful and interesting policy proposals. As I was mentioning, one was put in, we're going to illegalize the Illuminati because they're controlling everybody's minds here in Alberta. I didn't let that one get to the floor. But there's the hard thing with a grassroots organization. You shouldn't have an executive member stopping any policies getting through, but you've got to try and limit the insanity at the same time. But people should also understand that just because a policy has hit the floor at an AGM, or even if it's accepted by the members of the AGM, it doesn't mean it's going to be actually brought into force by the elected members later, though it's an indicator. I mean, it's fun media fodder. Like, I know you've probably played with this. When the NDP comes out and they get their socialist wing, puts in some crackpot stuff in their conventions, you know what? I twist the knife on it and I bug them. But I know realistically, the leadership of the NDP, Rachel Notley, isn't going to bring those extreme policies forward. We're going to see some serious, I think, games played with some of these, like the 15-minute cities things. I imagine we're going to be seeing people painting the UCP as conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, I would agree. But at the same time, I think, I'm not a party leader, but it would seem to be important to give voice to, the grassroots and the membership. Somebody who struggled with this a lot while he was premier was actually Ralph Klein, because Ralph Klein, he's fairly socially liberal, so he had the fiscal hawks all on board, but every time they went to a policy convention, there was always some kind of a resolution about, gay marriage or something that would come up, that he obviously was not interested in, but, at the same time had to kind of pay lip service, to bring them out. And I think Premier Smith, since she's been elected, most of the focus has been on these economic issues, electricity, energy, constitutional turf wars with Ottawa. And, what's been sitting in the back is, like you said, the grassroots of the party that, put her in there because they're the ones that, got rid of former Premier Kenney. And you have experience with Wild Rose, and, Danielle was the leader of them, for quite a while. And she had her own issues with the, with the membership and trying to balance, like you said,
you can't ignore them. I mean, and I don't want to dismiss. I was just saying they don't have to follow what comes out of these conventions, but they should feel guided somewhat. I mean, this is where you get a measure of your membership, the ones who are paying your donations, knocking on your doors for you, and
voting for
presumably keeping you in. So it's a balancing act. When you went through them, Jonathan, did you see, because there's always the turd in the punch bowl that hits every time, was the abortion thrown in there anywhere?
I didn't see anything about that, but I saw one about medical assistance in dying and wanting to add in safeguards to that. But shifting back to the crackpot ones, like there were a few where I was just like, why is this being debated at a convention? Like there was one about electronic voting machines, something like that. We haven't really seen an issue with that in Canada, but it's mainly an American one. And then there was another one about wanting to add like a second part to the charter where they wanted to include things like gun rights and rights against excess taxation, rights to healthcare. and all that. I've kind of found that odd. I'm like usually when it comes to like these constitutional type issues, you usually don't talk about them at a convention. But shifting to people painting the UCP as conspiracy theorists, I saw Gil McGowan having one of his typical meltdowns, saying that the crazy train has arrived and that there's
He's one to talk.
yeah.
Well, and they are going to do fodder with it. The other part that comes at these AGMs is when the policy debates come and people come up and get that microphone as proponents or all opponents and speak. And again, most people are rational and they're fine, but once in a while you'll get somebody pop out and there's again the age of the iPhone. No statement is going to go unrecorded.
Oh, of course. And even with like at the Conservative convention, there were a few motions that after they came out, Liberal MPs and NDP MPs and even like, social justice type people were coming out of the woodwork and jumping at the Conservatives, being like, how dare they pass this policy? So I'm sure we're definitely going to see some fallout from whether or not certain policies are adopted in the following days after that.
Yeah, well, it'll be something to be watching. Again, as I said, this is more of a, it's not a midterm AGM or something like that. Like this is the one that is her first as the leader, really, and it's. I mean, speaking from a business perspective, I think businesses, companies, they want to see some feelings of stability, right? Some that's what businesses always like to see is just.
Well, and she's been out front center, like, they were talking the first 100 days, she was elected on the policy of, the corporate taxes, and a lot of these social kind of issues have seemed to be taking a back seat. I at the press conference last week, somebody asked her about the pronouns, and Premier Smith gave an answer about, being a grassroots party and being in tune with the views of the grassroots. But she's also been pretty plain in the past on her own personal views. She's libertarian. She's pro rights or whatever. She's pro gay marriage. I mean,
she always has been.
She always has been. Like that's never been a secret. So. And I think she's probably personally a little bit reluctant to bring up some of these issues at AGM. We haven't talked about it yet, but I think that's the reason why they're pushing the CPP. It's referendum and it's reopening the idea of a provincial police force because these were kind of like the signature issues that were brought up in the leadership campaign.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if you can constantly just keep on top of the agenda and keep the conversation points, as much as people are trying to pull it over to the other issues, it's a little harder when, hey, we're busy right now, the pension plan or
we're doing what we said we would do.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, they also still do have to take the social conservatives seriously. I mean, we saw with Take Back Alberta. I mean, they've been very active. They've David Parker's outspoken, unapologetically socially conservative, makes no bones about it. We will rip leaders out if you don't, toe the line. And he knows how to use the tools for it. You get into the constituency associations, get in on the provincial executive. That's another battle that's coming up. Is the provincial executive? Have you looked at many of the people running for that, Jonathan?
I know that Take Back Alberta controls half of the board right now, and they're looking to take over the other half. Whether or not that's the case, I'm not too sure. I haven't really seen too much action online about that, but I think the main issue with this AGM is some of the policy motions that are put forward.
And I would just like to add, I would agree with that because, it's easy to have a unified party when everything is going well, like they have been. Premier Smith's been in a bit of a honeymoon period with voters, and she's getting a lot of support from people who are pleasantly surprised. Even people that were her detractors originally are saying that she's doing a good job. So it's easy to have a unified party when everybody's all on the same page, but you don't have to look very far back, to Jason Kenney and what happens when, that facade starts to crack and it comes out from underneath your feet. And a lot of people did say before the election that keeping that party together was going to be probably the toughest challenge that Premier Smith has in her mandate, in her term.
Well, she certainly learned hard lessons about that, in her Wildrose time and with caucus splitting on her and a number of things. I mean, I was on the provincial executive with the Wildrose while she was the leader of the party. And for people who don't directly get involved in politics may not understand that separation. The provincial executive runs the mechanics of the party.
Right.
They run the policy formulation. They run the constituency associations. They're there to prepare for the election, but they're a separate authority from caucus and leader. And sometimes people don't understand. And the leader's got to juggle between the two.
Well, and it's vital too, right? Like the ground game is what wins elections as much as policy.
And I will see. I mean, Danielle Smith, I think she's really reinvented herself from somebody who hit the political bottom so hard. I imagine she's learned a lot of things and thought on a lot of things. I know we had some horrific battles when I was in the executive with the leader of the party. I won't detail those. Maybe until I write a book when her political career is done.
When the names of the innocents have been changed.
Nothing terribly scandalous, but there was a lot of heads butting. I mean, they're in the same team, but at the same time, each tries. The leader sometimes tries to usurp a little onto the provincial executive, or the executive tries to push in and direct caucus, and neither should be doing so. But it happens, and that's what can really lead to some rifts and stress and problems.
Well, I would say, I don't mean to preempt or interrupt, but I've thought Premier Smith has done a really good job of bringing in her political leadership rivals into the cabinet. I was kind of out of it for a little while, so I wasn't too attuned, but having to deal with some of these people on a daily basis, Rebecca Schultz, Brian Jane, who's the
Rajat
Soni, like she's taken all those people, and I mean they had some pretty harsh things to say during the leadership campaign, and she's kind of seemed to manage to pull them together as a team. So,
and that's the caucus level, and cabinet, which is important, very important, and that's where I think she had her biggest problems prior, even when in opposition.
Yeah.
But now the next potential nest of hornets is the party structure, which Jonathan, you'll be going on the floor and sniffing around to see what members' views are.
Oh, of course, yeah, and I'll definitely be looking to speak to the big players before, during, and after.
Yeah, and I mean, this is where it's at these AGMs too, where the advocacy groups start coming up. Whether you like them or don't like them, some of the best areas, if you want to get candid views, go to the hospitality suites when some of these advocates get a few beers into them, and I promise you'll find some interesting stuff.
I'm sure.
But that's the risks of these AGMs as well. I mean, you're going to have, whether it's the parents union or pro-life associations or pro-business ones that are getting a little too bold and thinking how much sway they have with the party as well. I don't know. As you can see, I like the intrigue of this sort of crap, even though this is stuff that puts people off politics. This is how the sausage gets made, guys.
Yeah. Well, I was at the Friends of Science.
Another advocate, Michelle and the others.
Everybody knew you. They're like, hey, do you know Cory? I was like, yeah, I know Cory.
Careful how you answer that. It's not always a positive.
But it seemed like, that's a prime demographic, UCP demographic.
Mm-hmm.
Those people, there were some politicians shaking hands and kind of working the floor and doing that kind of thing.
Well, Friends of Science, they're pretty, for the most part, rational. I mean, a hardcore climate activist would think
but they're
otherwise.
Also quite conservative, I would say.
Yes, they're very much, in line with
But
things.
yes, a little less on the social activist side.
Yeah.
It's a little more professional.
It's at this AGM where you're going to see more of that. And it'll be a little more subtle than, say, an old school delegated leadership race. I used to love those when I was young, watching everybody wearing the same T-shirts for their team.
Yeah.
And see how the T-shirts actually move across the floor as one leadership candidate endorses the other. I mean, you had your
and then they start wearing each other's hats.
Yeah. Again, for dorks like me, it was very entertaining. But for others now, it's a little more nuanced. But that is what's going to be happening down there. And the stuff you don't see at the front podium is where you'll really see the meat and potatoes of what's going on in a party at one of these things. So we'll see if Standard's been on the ball. I got my press pass for it, and I'll go there too.
I don't think you need one, Cory. I think you just show up and say hi.
Not necessarily that welcome. I assure you. I appreciate it. Interesting times. But yeah, it'll be a lot to watch. And just to remind everybody, yes, we'll be covering it in depth. And, I'm sure we'll have some pipeline and my episodes talking about what we thought out of it.
Yep.
So as kind of brought in, Jonathan, have you had a look at that? Yeah, Justin Trudeau, he's come up with his open letter to Premier Smith on the Canada Pension Plan and Alberta Pension Plan.
Yes. So with that one, what Trudeau is saying is if the Alberta government moves forward, people shouldn't be worried because he's going to defend CPP. But what's interesting is that this open letter highlights that the point that Danielle Smith was making, which is that Alberta is paying in more than it's receiving. And when the provincial pension was announced, when I went to the press conference, she talked about how this is the biggest issue with that, and how Alberta is sending more money than we're getting back because we have a higher employment rate and younger population. And yeah.
Jonathan's kind of more at that contribution age, where we're kind of more at that withdrawal age. We're getting closer.
Yeah. Well, I talked about that. Oh, actually, it was a speaking event I was at the other night. But I said, because I brushed it off back when I led the Alberta Independence Party back in the 90s when I was in my 20s. And I had people coming up saying, an independent Alberta, but I'm worried about my pension. Is my pension? I said, don't worry about it. It's not a big concern. Don't worry about it. Well, actually, the grayer your hair gets, the closer you get to the end, it becomes a much bigger concern. I mean, if it's not there, you could be in serious trouble if you don't have outside investments. People who have contributed for decades and still, I might have another 10 or 15 years of work and I hope left in me, but it starts to become pretty important to make sure that balance is safe.
Well, when I was Jonathan's age, the concern was that there was going to be no.
Yeah, they said
CPP,
there wouldn't be one at that time. Yeah.
So that's a complete transformation now that the program is supposedly sustainable for 75 years.
Credit to Kretschmann. He did fix it up back because it was a Ponzi scheme prior to what him and Martin did.
Sure. And going back to the Friends of Science and conservative demographic, well, that also seems to be kind of a CPP kind of demographic, I would say. I didn't go around and ask people what their thoughts were on the pension, but I think there's a kind of a potential split even within the UCP among UCP supporters that tend to be maybe a little more aged than younger folks like Jonathan here, and still want to support conservative government.
Well, I think a lot of older people do want to support perhaps an Alberta pension plan, but they just really want to be darn sure
that they're going to get theirs.
My nest egg is going to be safe. Yeah. I'm going to get it later.
But what Premier Smith did mention when the pension was announced, that it would be similar or lower contribution rates and potentially higher amounts that people would receive in the end. So I think that's what's assuring people, because she had promised in legislation that it was guaranteed. I do think that the provincial pension plan might be the first bill coming forward. I know that Premier Smith did promise that the tax cuts thing would be, but I think right now with just the whole climate, I think that might change, and she'd probably bring forward the pension bill possibly as the first one. I know the legislature doesn't resume for another 2 weeks, so I mean, anything can happen really.
Yeah, I think it'd be personally, I think it'd be a bit of a gamble to throw a bill out on it this early when she's just saying she's starting the consultation. Though, I mean, I think some critics have been fair enough when they're going through the motions of the consultation, but it sounds to me like they're pretty much got their heart set on going ahead with this. It's just a matter of determining what it's going to look like.
All it needs is a referendum, really, and whether or not Albertans vote for it, I'm not too sure at this point. I mean, polling numbers do look a little mixed, and there's some uncertainty with what's going to happen.
By demographic.
Yeah.
Like when she's talking about lower contributions, I mean, that's a bone for you.
Yeah, that's for me.
You get to keep more of your check while you're going through. And then higher payouts, well, you have to be contributing for a few decades before you're even going to come close to those higher payouts, because the people that are going to be collecting out of CPP are going to be getting pretty close to what they would have been getting now, right?
Well, a whole lot of this rides on the interpretation of what Alberta's share of the existing fund is. And there's a huge bone of contention going on there. I mean, as Jonathan said, Trudeau's letter was an admission saying, yeah, we're dependent on Alberta for contributing. That's the only way we're keeping this thing together. And if they pull out in any form, we're going to be in some serious trouble.
Well, I think it kind of becomes a proxy for equalization. And, we had that referendum as well under Jason Kenney, and, they haven't done anything with that. But it seems to me that the pension debate and the contributions of the Alberta pension are almost parallel, if not intersecting at some point with the equalization debate, and how much money is actually flowing back to the federal government in those kind of payments as well, right?
Well, beyond the overpayment, it's the amount of principal we would be entitled to. I mean, their calculation of it, I know I got barked at heavily by a few folks as soon as I even said it on Twitter, but I do feel that they're taking it on it's in the legislation, and if you interpret it that way, Alberta would be entitled to well over half of what's in the pot. I just don't see Canada bending on that. But I mean, before it goes to a referendum, I think they're going to have some sort of solid number, whether it's 20% of what's in there or 30%. Like we're going to say, well, we'll pull out. We're going to have this much to start with.
Well, absolutely. And there's an interesting column by Jack Mintz. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jack.
He's in Jack. I haven't seen that particular column necessarily.
It was in the National Post this morning where he was talking about $384 million. Basically, just being a good starting point to actually have this discussion about all these other ancillary issues, including equalization and taxation and balance of payments and energy security, you know what I mean? Like they all kind of feed it, because if you want pension security, then you're going to have some kind of an economic basis really to back it up, right?
So from again, I'll throw it kind of in your business perspective, though. I mean, that money isn't just sitting in a money bin in cash. It's all tied up in investments of all sorts and all kinds. If Alberta were to pull out and we're going to separate that, boy, they've got a heck of a task. Fund, yeah. Well, are we going to completely liquidate that fund there, or do we take 30% of that fund and move it? It's going to be quite well, I mean, no matter how you do it, it's going to be a lot of work. But that could also disrupt business markets too. And so you get shifting on investment priorities.
And which assets would you want? Like would an Alberta government maybe be more inclined towards some of the, energy assets, right? Mm-hmm. At a time when we're supposedly downplaying, the fossil fuel industry. So maybe CPP unloads all its holdings in Suncor and Petro-Canada, back to the Alberta government and say, here, you take it.
See, I would like the CPP to keep all the energy assets, because that gives the rest of Canada a heck of an interest for us to keep working out here and doing well with our energy companies. Because if you sink those energy companies, you're sinking your own pension plan. Yeah, well, that's just my way of thinking. But it would just be, I'm very thrilled and interested in this whole thing, but it's going to be a complicated, difficult thing to get to the point, I think, where Albertans will accept it in a referendum.
I agree. And I'm initially, my thoughts are I'm fairly supportive. I'm familiar with CASE in Quebec. They haven't done as well as CPP, but there's definitely a lot of autonomy on how they invest, where they invest, and how they do it. But then at the same time, like you said, this is going to be a very complicated divorce and division of assets. It's like you get the kid, I get the car.
Yeah, I don't like that kid.
She gets the house.
Yeah, that one.
That one. Just wipe his nose.
Yeah, the kid who's licking the windows. You can have that. And I mean, it depends on, again, with support and demographics. I mean, we don't want to absorb more risk and kind of get when we're getting to the point of looking at drawing out. But I mean, if I was in my 20s or whatever, I'd say, well, what the heck, let's roll the dice a little on something,
Can afford to take a little more risk there, Jonathan, in your investment portfolio.
So I guess, I as perhaps a campaign, tactic when it comes to the point of a referendum, they might want to really reach out to the younger voters and get them out.
Yep.
Because they'd be less, I think, I don't know, but they might be more inclined to support the concept of a newer pension.
I agree.
But anyway, another area of it, as you said, is opening up a lot of discussions. It was interesting. Somebody's talking about, EI. We're kind of getting hooked in the same basis as we do a CPP. It's not a building fund. It's a program. But with EI, Alberta pays far more in than it pulls out. And I've heard talk occasionally of Alberta starting its own employment insurance program too, which would really throw a wrench into the business of Eastern Canada if they do that.
Especially with Nova Scotia, I believe the amount of hours you have to have work to claim EI in Alberta is, I think, 3 times that of Nova Scotia or something like that. I remember hearing that somewhere. I mean, whether or not that ends up becoming a conversation, I know that Daniel Smith hasn't talked about an Alberta employment insurance plan, but I mean, politics changes every week, so who knows?
Well, when I was young and during the bust in the 80s, the crash of 86, 87, when I just happened to graduate from high school, the Alberta alphabet at the time was UIC, ALCB, RCMP. It wasn't called employment insurance.
No, it was unemployment insurance at that time.
Unemployment enjoyment,
Well, and it used to frustrate. It was terribly bad back in the 90s when I was starting in the oil field. It would drive me nuts because I worked a lot at surveying ahead of seismic projects. It's very seasonal. And you have a whole pile of work you really got to wrap up, usually before breakup hits in March, April. But something would happen, usually at the end of February, start of March. All our Maritimers that came out for the season suddenly got enough hours in to collect DI for the rest of the year. And they're gone. They won't work a day longer than they had to collect. And I'm not saying all of them. A lot of them stayed too. I want to be fair. And they were fantastic workers, fantastic people, and worked out the rest of the season. But we would have a huge labor crisis. We'd lose at least half of them because the system was just being played. You know, and in Alberta, if you wanted to collect, you had to work well beyond that to be eligible. But over there, you didn't have to work long at all. And then suddenly, yep, you're good for the year.
Yeah. It's become almost an equalization program in itself as well.
Well, that's it. We should have been focusing on moving the people to the industries rather than moving the money to the people over there. But that's,
I mean, like many Newfies did stay in Fort
yeah.
McMurray, and you know they've set up their own little community there.
even Arthur's still out here.
Somewhere. Arthur, are you out there?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Arthur's enjoying his job with the Alberta government right now.
And like I said, I want to couch it. There were a lot of fantastic Maritimers came out. They were part of building Alberta, and they're still here, or even ones that came and went, but worked their butts off and worked full amounts. But that program was abused, and it was used as a wealth redistribution scheme, which it really shouldn't have been. And it still is to a degree today. Saying one more thing for maybe Danielle to think about. Hey, if you can't get them on the pension.
Well, I'm kind of curious if
provincial
Alberta did put in its own EI program, maybe the restrictions would be twice as high as they are now. I've never actually collected. I mean, I've been paying in for however many years. I have no idea how much was it. It's got to be fairly substantial, I would think.
Yeah, well, there's no, they must have some degree of a fund, but still it's a little different, that one. It's an insurance program.
It goes on your earnings, on whatever earnings you are, not necessarily on how much you've earned over time, as opposed to a pension, right?
Yeah, so it's not a built-up cumulative thing. If you're off work for 2 weeks, you get 2 weeks coverage. If you're off for 6 months, so be it. But it wasn't based on. I don't know. Lots to chew on. Maybe it'll come out next year's AGM. I think we've run out of time, though. So we've solved a few world's problems, but not all of them.
No,
more next time.
We'll save a few for next time.
Yes. Thank you both for coming in today, guys, and filling those roles that are typically taken by the other stodgy, other Western Standard staff. So, Jonathan, Shaun, thank you very much. And thank all you guys for tuning in this week. Be sure to watch for the Cory Morgan show and take advantage of that, getting past the paywall while you can. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take a subscription out as soon as that wall's back up. It's important to us. All right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
The current Lethbridge feed grain prices are as follows. Cash barley's at $3.42, feed wheat's at $3.52, and corn's trading at $3.39 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, December Minneapolis futures increased 5 1/4 cents at $7.33, with local hard red spring bids for October movement at $9.66 per bushel. In the oil seeds, nearby canola futures lost $6.30 at $7.1290 per ton, with delivered values for October movement at $16.05 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentils are holding at 36.5 cents a pound, and yellow peas are trading at $10.75 per bushel. In the cattle markets, December live cattle are up 15 cents at $187.02 per 100 weight. For more information on grain marketing, call me at 403-394-1711. I'm Sean Smith at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access